Well, EU certainly has an interesting history, and to discuss this in more detail, we're being joined by Jan Zielonka, Professor of European Politics at the University of Oxford. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good evening.
So welcome to TVP World. My first question is going to be about the timeline of the European integration. It is quite an impressive timeline, isn't it? But obviously, looking from our perspective, the most important event seems to be us joining the European Union. But looking at it objectively, which single event, apart from the formation of the bloc, would you say was the most important in its history so far?
Well, students of European integration usually emphasize successive treaties. The most important of them was Treaty of Rome, which created a common market, and then the Maastricht Treaty, which created common currency. But of course, the deepening of the European Union envisaged in those treaties went hand in hand with enlarging the European Union uh, uh, from the original fifth to 27 today. And all of those enlargement basically created new neighbors, new concerns, uh, new ways of doing politics within the European Union. So I would say that the whole process of deepening and widening went hand in hand, and they both shaped the union of today.
Professor, according to the data that I have, Poland's net profit from joining the EU stands at 160 billion euro. However, only 53% of Poles are happy with being in the EU. Why do you think this divergence? I mean, this is a huge profit, right?
Yes, but this profit is not always divided equally. Although the paradox is that, for instance, peasants benefited most from European integration financially, and they today very often rally on the streets of Europe and Poland too against the European Union or against certain regulations of the European Union. So, look, these data which you have given are very aggregate data, and everybody experiences European integration in her personal way.
So this brings us actually to this sort of eternal debate about the European Union. It is natural for people to forget about the benefits, which they already have. They simply seem to ignore them. Like, it's something that you have and you never miss it until it's gone away. That's something that people of Great Britain, for example, have felt quite strongly following the Brexit. Now it's turning into a regret. But coming back to the discussion, what do you think is going to be EU's future in terms of the way it is governed? Some people say the European Union is a bureaucracy. It's acting too slowly. But then again, sometimes even the same people are saying, look, we don't want a superstate. We're afraid of this basically taking our sovereignty away. Can the European Union thread this fine path between these two extremes, or at least what some of the skeptics are saying are extremes, and create a system which would be trusted by most citizens and perceived to be efficient yet democratic at the same time?
That's very ambitious.
Well, in absolute terms, the EU has a lot of bureaucrats, but in relative terms, if we look at the number of people there are in the European Union and compare it, for instance, with bureaucracy of member states, this bureaucracy is very, very small. The same applies to the budget. We talk about European money all the time, but we forget that the EU budget is much less than 2% of budgets of the whole Europe. Member states spend between 40 and 50% for the activities. The European Union less than 2%. So one has to look at those things in the way which is informed, but politics has its own rights, because the European Union has to make sometimes tough decisions to help European citizens. They have distributional effects. Take climate change. We all know that climate change is going to hit us very hard, and maybe not my generations, but generations of my children certainly cannot afford it. But all climate change regulations have their price tickets. If we want to combat climate change, we have to invest money. And this is not always welcome, particularly by the older generation, which believes that they are not going to be affected so much. And of course, I talk about climate change, but we can talk about anything else. We can talk about Ukraine. Everybody wants to have Ukraine liberated and part of European community. But when Ukrainians send to Europe the only export products they have, really agricultural products, those who are affected by the inflow of those products are staking rebellion sometimes. So this is the daily bread of politics. The only thing is that we shouldn't really cultivate myths. We should focus on facts, or otherwise we will end up like the United Kingdom.
That's right, Professor. I mean, you've mentioned the environment, of course, the Green Deal. So many concessions were made on the Green Deal, right, ahead of the European Parliament elections, especially, I would say. But let me ask you about Ukraine. Assuming that the EU is a rational political actor, would Ukraine joining the EU be beneficial for the Union?
Well, you can ask a different way the same questions. Would you be better off with Ukraine, which is constantly being blackmailed by Russia and is unable to benefit economically from European integration? The same question was posed when Berlin Wall collapsed, and there were also a lot of people saying, oh, countries like Poland, too large, too many peasant agricultural products, they will be big beneficiaries of our money. And yet Poland joined, and it has become economic tiger in Europe. So you see, we can hope that the same scenario will apply to Ukraine. But as you know, we know what the history is, but we don't know what the future will bring about.
Speaking of Ukraine, one more question. Do you think the debate concerning aid for Ukraine, which we've already mentioned that, it's one of the most important things here, does actually point us towards a very interesting paradox? Many people say that we don't really want majority voting, but when Viktor Orban turns up and starts blocking aid for Ukraine, even the skeptics are starting to think, okay, maybe the European Union should actually have a mechanism to override such countries in situations like that. Do you think that this could be the argument for a European Union political reform going in this direction?
I think we are a victim of this dilemma, a nation state or a European state. And of course, all those heads of state sitting at the decision-making table of the European Union are not willing to commit collective suicides and transfer their powers to Brussels and become kind of a province of a larger European state. But at the same time, what you said about veto policy is detrimental to Europe's interest, because each time countries applied vetoes, and this is not only the case with Viktor Orban. So, many other countries block various reforms or policies if they do not suit their ends for various reasons. Then the compromise they reach is a common lowest denominator, which doesn't solve the problems we have at hand. You see, and so the union cannot really perform functions citizens of Europe expect from it. But of course, nation states hold on their powers, even though in many situations they cannot really deal with problems we are confronted with, like global markets, big multinational firms, or discuss area war and peace or climate change. They cannot solve those problems on their own, or issues like migration, or issues like indebtedness, and so on. Most of those problems required multi-level government, which involves not just nation states, but also local administrative units, regions, cities, and also in some cases transnational units like the European Union, because size matters in economics and politics, and the size is obviously of the European Union much larger than even such big states like Germany.
Well, this is certainly a difficult balancing act, right? I mean, unity versus sovereignty. I guess there's some strength in unity. Professor Jan Zielonka, thank you, sir, for being with us.